Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Eddie Jennings, and in this video I'm going to talk about why you should always put a Type 1 hypervisor on your bare metal physical server. And this discussion assumes you've already been through the process of whether or not you actually need a physical server. You've went through the analysis and have determined yes, you need to have either on premises or in co-location a physical server to run VMs to be doing your workload. And the reason why you would put that hypervisor right on the bare metal rather than a server operating system, or rather I guess a full server operating system, comes down to two reasons in my opinion. First of all is good use of hardware resources, and the second reason is flexibility. So as far as good use of hardware resources, hypervisors themselves are pretty lean. Their job is simply to support and run the VMs that are on top of them. You don't need all of the services that might come with a full server OS. An example of this would be Windows Server. You can get HyperV completely for free, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. And if you install just HyperV on the bare metal, you're not going to have a GUI. You're going to have just the services running that you need to run your HyperV VMs and be able to connect to the server remotely from either your workstation or whatever jump box that you have for managing the server. And that's it. That's all that's running on the bare metal. So the maximum amount of resources that's on the physical server can be put toward servicing your VMs and giving them the resources they need for whatever workloads that you have. Versus if you install Windows Server, and in particular if you install the desktop experience, the GUI on the bare metal, and you choose the Hyper-V role, which will still turn into a bare metal Type 1 hypervisor, you now have this GUI that's always running on that bare metal server that's probably not going to serve you very well at all. You're likely going to be managing this via PowerShell remoting, or you're going to have your jump box or your workstation that you have Hyper-V Manager installed on, and that's going to be connecting to your hypervisor, and you're managing your VMs and virtual switches and all that good stuff that way. And so there are resources that are being eaten on the bare metal by having the GUI and other services that could be put toward your VMs. So you want to try to have whatever's on the bare metal to be as lean as possible. Linux is a little special situation with this as far as KVM, which stands for kernel-based virtual machine. With that, you actually are installing Linux, either CentOS or Fedora or any of the Debian flavors of Linux. But the difference is what you're installing are just the pieces you need for KVM. Just the pieces you need to be able to run virtual machines, to be able to manage virtual machines, very much like just the Hyper-V installation rather than the full Windows Server. With Linux, or at least as far as I've seen, I may be wrong with this, but I've never seen just like here's a separate download from CentOS. This is just KVM. It's you download CentOS, and then during your install process, you either install just a bare minimum server, and then you install the packages you need for KVM, or during the installer you choose the selections for like headless virtualization, and that will install just the pieces that you need. So again, the goal on the actual bare metal is to have whatever is running on it, whichever Type 1 hypervisor you're choosing to run on that, VMware or KVM or Hyper-V. You want the bare minimum of software that's using resources, because you want the most resources for your VMs themselves. The other reason deals with flexibility, and an example of this is, let's say that you have your physical server and you're running your VMs and your workload and such on it, and you're now at maximum capacity. You have however much RAM is on this physical box, and the RAM can't be upgraded any further and such, but you still need to deploy more VMs, or the VMs that you have need more resources to be able to run effectively, and you physically just don't have the resources there in that box. It's time to to upgrade to a new box, or you're in a situation where this box is old, it's reaching an end of life, and it's time for the hardware refresh. Well, when you get your new box and you have it spec'd out and such, and you install your hypervisor, in particular if you're installing the same hypervisor that you had on your old box, the process of exporting, importing, or migrating VMs is a relatively painful process. Relatively painless process. Maybe that was a Freudian slip there. Famous last words in IT should, right? Anyway, but I'm not saying that there are never problems with migrating VMs. But if you think about it, all of the major hypervisors have tools to be able to move VMs from one host to another. And if consider that without VMs, you had the one physical box that's running all of your services. And by running all of your services, I don't mean multiple VMs. I mean you have a box that has whatever server OS installed that is running database services and file services and web services and on and on and on. Of course, you would probably never do that, but let's just say that you did, and then it's time to upgrade the hardware and you get the brand new box. Well, if you have all of these workloads installed on the bare metal, then for the new box you're probably going to have to just reinstall everything. Reinstall your OS, patch it, get all of your services up and running, and then migrate your data from the old physical box to new physical box, and that's going to be a lot of hassle and chance for stuff to break and go wrong versus alright, so you have your workload running, let's migrate the VM. And there are often mechanisms to be able to do that, to have little to no downtime during that migration process, depending on the technology that you choose there. So just from that one example alone, you already have a lot more flexibility with just moving from whatever the one host is to the next host. Another point of flexibility, and this is particular to Windows, is when you install the hypervisor, in this case HyperV, to the bare metal, and all you're installing is HyperV. Now, I'm not talking about installing Windows Server plus the HyperV role. I'm talking about installing HyperV, which is 100% free. You can go to Microsoft's site and download it. It talks about it being a trial, but I assure you it is 100% free. That is not tied to your licensing for Windows Server. And so when it's time to, whenever the next version of Hyper-V comes out, you will be able to make that upgrade without also having to upgrade your Windows Server VMs, as well as you can make the upgrade and not have to worry about the licensing of those Windows Server VMs. And what I mean by that is if you choose to install the actual Windows Server OS with the Hyper-V role, then you've installed on the bare metal, let's say Server 2016 with the Hyper-V role. Well, when the next version of Hyper-V comes out, that's great, but what you installed on the bare metal is Server 2016. Do you have the necessary licensing to be able to install whatever the next version of Windows Server is? And if you have that, great. You can do that. But just having the Hyper-V piece kind of saves you that hassle of making sure it doesn't lock in your hypervisor to the version of Windows Server that you're wanting to run your workloads with. So I see that as a point of flexibility, and again, going back to the idea of the hardware resources, rather than running that full Windows Server plus Hyper-V role, just having Hyper-V on it gives you the most amount of resources available to your VMs. So hopefully this information is going to be useful for you, in particular if you're having to talk to supervisor or management about why you're choosing to just install the bare metal hypervisor, the Type 1 hypervisor on the bare metal rather than a full server OS. These can give you some arguments and reasoning as to why it would be a good idea to do that. Also, I welcome comments if you have other reasons why it's a good idea to install just the hypervisor to the bare metal, or if you have reasons of, hey, Eddie, you're completely off your rocker, we should be installing the full server OS at all times. welcome that too. The whole idea of the community is to learn and learn from one another. We might not always agree on our opinion of things, but we can probably learn something from one another. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure that you like the video and subscribe to the channel so you can be aware of when more content comes out. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you the next time.